Snow fell like ash from a dying sky. At midnight, the old steel bridge over the frozen Kootenai River was already cracking under artillery shockwaves. On the far side of Blackstone Valley, an armored column rolled forward. Tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, troop carriers, an iron flood ready to swallow the last evacuation route. And standing between them and the bridge was one woman with a rifle she wasn't supposed to have. They whispered her name through the radio static now, though 2 weeks ago, nobody would answer her calls. Lieutenant Reese Kincaid, 27 years old, the best shot most of them had ever seen, and the soldier they'd told to go home. 2 weeks earlier, Quantico, Virginia. The range was silent except for the wind. Reese lay prone on the 600-yard line, her cheek pressed against the stock of the M110. Her breathing had slowed to 10 breaths per minute. Her heart rate was 58. She had learned, over 8 months of training with a man who shouldn't have been training her, how to make her body disappear into the equation. Wind, distance, gravity, bullet drop, these were the variables. Her body was not. The target was a silhouette, standard issue, nothing special. She had hit 346 of them over the course of the selection program. 3 misses, all of them in the first week, before Colonel Harlow had started showing up at the range after hours with a thermos of coffee that was always cold by the time she finished shooting. "Send it," the range officer said. She exhaled to the bottom of her lungs. The world narrowed to the reticle and the wind and the pressure of her finger on the trigger. The shot broke clean. Downrange, the silhouette jolted. Center mass, 347. She stood, slung the rifle, and walked back toward the range shack. The other candidates were already packing up. 18 of them had started the program. 4 remained. All men, all bigger than her, all carrying 80-pound rucksacks over 12-mile courses faster than she could. That was the problem. She could outshoot them. She could outthink them. She could move through terrain like smoke and read wind patterns like some people read sheet music. But when the instructors loaded the pack and said, "Move," her body gave her exactly what it had. 5 feet 6 inches, 128 pounds. Appalachian mountain stock, built for endurance, not for hauling weight like a pack mule. Major Dax Harding was waiting by the shack. He was a solid man, square-jawed, with the kind of face that had seen enough combat to stop smiling at things that weren't funny. He didn't smile now. "Kincaid, office." She followed him inside. The office smelled like gun oil and old coffee. Harding sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived a decade of officers who didn't care about it. He didn't invite her to sit. "You know why you're here," he said. "Yes, sir." "You're the best shooter in this class. Hell, you're the best shooter I've seen in 5 years." He paused, looked at her the way a mechanic looks at an engine that almost works. "But MARSOC isn't the Olympics. We don't give medals for marksmanship. We give them for bringing your team home alive." "I can do that, sir." "Not if you can't carry your own gear." He leaned back. "You failed the endurance test, twice. You're 3 minutes over the standard on the ruck march. Your PT scores are passing, but barely. I can improve. You've had 8 months. If you haven't closed the gap by now, you won't." He said it without malice, just a fact, delivered the way facts are when there's no argument left. "You're done, Kincaid. Dismissed." She stood there for 3 seconds, long enough that he looked up, waiting for her to salute or argue or break down. She did none of those things. "Understood, sir." She walked out. The parking lot was gravel and cold. November in Virginia. The sky was the color of concrete. She threw her gear bag into the bed of her truck and stood there, hands on the tailgate, breathing the way she'd learned to breathe when her body wanted to do something her mind knew was useless. "Rough day." She turned. Colonel Garrett Harlow was 70 feet away, leaning against a dusty Jeep Cherokee that was older than she was. He was 68 years old, lean and weathered, with gray hair cropped close and eyes that still looked like they could read the wind at 1,000 yards. He'd been a civilian contractor on base for the last 6 months, running ballistic seminars that nobody attended because the active duty instructors didn't like being lectured by ghosts. Reese had attended every single one. "They cut me," she said. "I know. You knew before I did, didn't you?" Harlow pushed off the Jeep and walked over. He moved the way old operators moved. Economical. No wasted motion. Like every step had been budgeted in advance. "I knew last week," he said. Harding asked my opinion. "And?" "I told him he was making a mistake." Harlow looked at her. "But I also told him he was following the manual. And the manual says you're not strong enough." "I'm not." "No, you're not. He said it the way a surgeon says you have a broken bone. True and fixable. But you're smart enough to work around it. And that's a skill most of these guys will never learn because they've never had to." Reese looked at the rifle bag in her truck. "Doesn't matter now." "It will." "When?" Harlow smiled. It was the kind of smile that carried weight, the kind that came from 30 years of being told no and finding ways to turn it into yes. "I got rejected 4 times before they let me into the program," he said. "You know what I did?" "What?" "I waited. I trained. And when the right moment came, I didn't ask for permission. I just showed up and did the job." He nodded toward her truck. "You're a better shot than I was at 27, Kincaid. And when your moment comes, you'll know it." He turned and walked back to the Jeep. Reese watched him go. Then she climbed into her truck and drove north. Montana, present day. The valley had no name worth remembering. It was the kind of geography that existed only to be crossed. A shallow basin between 2 ridgelines, bisected by the Kootenai River, which in summer ran cold and clean over smooth gray stones. In winter, it froze solid from bank to bank. The ice was thick enough to walk on, thick enough, if you were desperate and lucky, to drive a loaded truck across. Tonight, no one was lucky. The temperature had dropped to -23°C before midnight. The wind had been building since dusk, hauling curtains of snow off the northern ridge and driving them down into the valley at a flat angle that turned every exposed surface into a white blur. The blizzard was mature and committed, the kind that didn't apologize, the kind that erased roads and identities and mistakes with equal indifference. The bridge was called the Mercer Bridge, after an engineer dead for 60 years. It was a 2-lane steel truss structure, the sort of thing built during an era when function was considered sufficient justification and beauty was someone else's problem. The trusses were painted green once. Now they were rust. The rust had eaten deep in several places. A structural assessment 3 years ago had recommended immediate reinforcement of the central span's primary load-bearing members. The reinforcement had never happened. Now the bridge was shaking, not from traffic. The last civilian vehicle had crossed 40 minutes ago. A school bus carrying 11 children and a driver named Roy Kimball, who had refused to leave until every child was aboard, and who had crossed the bridge doing 60 kilometers per hour with his headlights off, navigating by memory and instinct through a blizzard that had reduced visibility to less than 30 meters. The shaking came from the artillery. The enemy's forward batteries had been ranging the valley for the past hour, walking their rounds up from the southern end, searching for the bridge with the methodical patience of professionals who had done this before and understood that patience in artillery work was a force multiplier. 3 rounds had landed within 200 meters of the bridge structure. One had struck the riverbank 40 meters east of the eastern approach and thrown a column of frozen earth 20 meters into the air. The bridge had swayed. In the command post, a requisitioned farmhouse on the North Ridge, its windows blacked out, its rooms thick with the smell of cold coffee and unwashed men, Captain Wade Brennan stood over a map table and worked the problem with the focused calm of a man who had accepted that all his options were bad and was simply choosing the least bad one. "Demolition team status," he said without looking up. Sergeant First Class Holt Mercer answered from the doorway. He was a large man, gray at the temples, with a veteran's economical relationship with motion. Team is set on the north end, Mercer said. Charges are placed. We're waiting on your word. And the south end? No team. We couldn't get anyone across. Brennan looked up. No one? Had a volunteer. Mercer paused. The pause was the kind that carries information. She crossed 40 minutes ago. Said she'd buy us time. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. She. Yes, sir. Who? Mercer's face was carefully neutral, the expression of a man reporting a fact he found difficult to categorize. Lieutenant Kincaid, sir. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind hit the farmhouse hard enough to shutter the walls. Private First Class Gage Sullivan, 22 years old and 6 months out of basic training, was standing near the doorway. He had been listening without intending to. He was at the age where you absorbed everything because you hadn't yet learned which things were worth absorbing. Who's Kincaid? He asked. Neither Brennan nor Mercer answered immediately. Mercer finally said, someone who shouldn't be here. He said it the way you say something that is both a statement of fact and a kind of prayer, descriptive and reverent at once. Through the frosted farmhouse window, if you looked very carefully in the right direction, you could just barely distinguish the dark outline of the bridge against the white void of the valley. And if you looked at the bridge's upper truss, at the highest point of its eastern tower, you might have noticed, if you were looking for it, a shape that wasn't quite snow. Still, patient, white, watching. Brennan turned back to the map. How long until the column reaches the valley floor? 30 minutes, Mercer said. Maybe 25. And the last civilians still crossing? Final count is short. 14 people unaccounted for. They may have taken the northern track. May have. Yes, sir. Brennan put both hands flat on the map table and looked at the bridge on the paper. Then he looked at the window, in the direction of the real bridge. Hold demolition, he said, until she calls it. Mercer didn't argue. That, Gage Sullivan would remember later, was perhaps the most significant thing that happened in that farmhouse. Because Holt Mercer was not a man who held his tongue on matters of tactical judgment. He had opinions, and he expressed them. But on this he said nothing. He just nodded. Outside, the artillery walked another round into the valley. The bridge shook, and held, and waited. Her name in another life had been just Reese. Before the army, before Quantico, before the night an old colonel with kind eyes had found her on a shooting range in West Virginia and asked if she'd ever considered making her hobby into a profession. She was from a town called Harlan, tucked into the Appalachian foothills, where the roads were gravel and the people were harder. Her grandfather had been a Navy SEAL, her father an Army Ranger. Both dead now. Both had taught her to shoot before she was tall enough to hold the rifle without a sandbag rest. The discharge papers from MARSOC were filed in a folder in her barracks room at the Montana Logistics Depot. She was technically a supply officer now. Inventory management, requisition forms, a job designed for someone the Army still wanted to keep but didn't know what to do with. She had been in Montana for 6 days when the northern border collapsed. The enemy wasn't supposed to be here. This was American soil, the Canadian border, a line on a map that had been peaceful for over a century. But lines on maps don't stop men with guns and the will to cross them. And the insurgent force that had swept down from occupied Alaska 3 weeks ago had proven that geography was just another variable in the equation. The radio chatter said it was Russian-backed, remnants of the northern offensive. A mix of Spetsnaz operators and local militias armed with stolen American equipment. The kind of enemy that didn't wear uniforms and didn't follow the rules because the rules had stopped applying the moment the war went asymmetric. They wanted the bridge. Without it, the U.S. supply line into the northern defensive perimeter would collapse. With it, they could move armor and heavy equipment into Blackstone Valley and cut off 3 entire battalions. The civilians caught in the crossfire were collateral. 147 people, families, children, old folks who hadn't evacuated when they were supposed to because they didn't believe it would get this bad. It got this bad. Reese had been in the logistics office when the call came through. Captain Brennan's voice on the radio, clipped and professional, asking if there were any qualified snipers on base. There weren't. The nearest sniper team was 6 hours out. The civilians had maybe 2. She had listened to the radio, listened to Brennan and Mercer working through the options, listened to the sound of men realizing they were going to have to blow the bridge with people still on it, or leave it standing and lose the whole valley. And then she had stood up, walked out of the office, and gone to her barracks. The rifle was in a hard case under her bunk, a .338 Lapua Magnum, bolt action, custom build. It had belonged to Colonel Harlow. He'd given it to her the day she left Quantico, along with a box of hand-loaded ammunition and a note that said, "You'll know when you need this." She knew. She loaded the rifle into her truck and drove to the command post. Brennan had looked at her like she was a problem he didn't have time to solve. "Kincaid, what are you doing here?" "I'm volunteering, sir." "For what?" "Overwatch, south side of the bridge." Brennan's jaw tightened. "You're a logistics officer." "I'm a soldier, sir, and I can shoot." "MARSOC rejected you." "They rejected me for endurance standards, not marksmanship." She put the rifle case on the table between them. "I can hold that bridge long enough for the civilians to cross." "One rifle against an armored column?" "I don't need to stop them, sir. Just slow them down." Mercer had been standing in the corner. He stepped forward now. "Captain," he said quietly, "I know her file. She's not lying about the marksmanship." Brennan looked at Mercer, then at Reese, then at the map. "How long do you need?" "However long it takes to get everyone across. That could be 90 minutes. Then I'll buy you 90 minutes. Brennan was silent for a long time. Outside, another artillery round landed, closer this time. "This isn't a MARSOC selection, Kincaid. This is real." "I know, sir. If you go out there, you're on your own. No backup, no support, no extraction until it's done." "Understood." Brennan looked at her, really looked. The way a commander looks at a soldier before sending them into something they might not come back from. "You get one chance to change your mind," he said. "Right now." Reese picked up the rifle case. "I'm not changing my mind, sir." Brennan nodded slowly. "Then get moving. And Kincaid." "Sir, don't die out there. I've got enough paperwork already." She almost smiled. Almost. She crossed the bridge at 22:27 hours. The blizzard was in full howl by then. Visibility was less than 50 meters. The bridge deck was slick with ice. Every step required attention. The rifle case was slung across her back, 40 pounds, heavier than it should have been because Harlow had loaded it with extra magazines and a spotting scope and a thermal blanket she probably wouldn't have time to use. She moved carefully, not because she was afraid of falling, but because falling would waste time, and time was the one resource she didn't have in surplus. The south end of the bridge terminated in a concrete abutment overgrown with frozen brush. Beyond that, the valley opened up. Rolling terrain, sparse tree cover, good fields of fire if you knew where to look. She knew where to look. The reconnaissance took 41 minutes. She moved through the terrain the way Harlow had taught her, low, slow, observing. The bridge structure itself offered 7 primary firing positions, 3 on the eastern tower, 2 on the western, 2 on the deck itself, using the steel trusses for cover. She memorized each one, the angles, the sight lines, the routes between them. This wasn't a static defense. Static defenses died when the enemy figured out where you were. This was a mobile defense. Hit and move and hit. Make them think there were more of you than there were. Make them afraid of ghosts. She also noted the bridge's weaknesses. The central span was the problem. The third pylon from the north, the one the engineers had flagged 3 years ago, was visibly cracked at the base. Not catastrophic yet, but under stress, under vibration, under the kind of punishment an artillery barrage would deliver, that crack would propagate. Fast. She estimated the bridge had maybe 2 hours before it failed on its own. That was fine. She only needed 90 minutes. At 23:08 hours, she climbed to her first firing position, the Eastern Tower, upper walkway. Inside a ghillie suit she had constructed herself over 3 weeks from materials chosen for thermal signature suppression and visual texture. White, gray, pale blue, the colors of winter at night, in the snow, in the dark. She was approximately invisible. Her breathing slowed, 12 breaths per minute. Even now, with the temperature at -23 and the wind driving ice crystals against every exposed surface, her breathing was controlled. She had practiced breathing under stress for so long that slow breathing had become her default state. The radio in her chest rig crackled. Sniper, confirm position. Captain Brennan's voice. Controlled. Professional. She pressed the transmit button. Bridge overwatch. I'll slow them down. She paused. Don't blow the bridge until I say. A longer pause on the other end. Copy that. Civilians still crossing. We need 12 more minutes. Minimum. Understood. She released the transmit button and returned her eye to the scope. In the valley below, through the shifting snow, she could see the first hint of vehicle lights. The column was early. She made one small adjustment to her position. 2 centimeters left. The weight redistributed from her left hip to her right, and she settled. The scope found a human figure at the head of the column, an officer, standing beside the lead vehicle, pointing forward, making decisions. She read the wind. 3 degrees east-southeast, gusting, unstable. She made the correction without thinking about it, the way a pianist makes corrections for the particular weight of an instrument they haven't played before. She exhaled slowly, to the bottom of her breath. She waited. The shot broke at 23:51 hours and 32 seconds. It was audible for approximately 1.4 seconds in the valley before the wind took it and distributed it into the general noise of the blizzard, where it became indistinguishable from artillery echo and structural groan. The muzzle flash, if there was one, was invisible at this range in this snow. The thermal bloom of the discharge dissipated in under 2 seconds against the ambient background. The officer at the head of the column was a lieutenant colonel named Harris Brandt. Reese did not know his name and would not have found the information particularly relevant. He was 44 years old, a capable officer with a reputation for aggressive, forward movement. He had been standing beside his command vehicle for approximately 90 seconds when the round struck him. He was dead before the sound of the shot reached the column. The reaction was immediate and professionally conditioned. The soldiers near him dropped. The vehicle commanders buttoned up. Radio traffic spiked across multiple frequencies simultaneously. This was trained behavior, and it happened fast. For approximately 40 seconds, the column's forward movement stopped entirely, while the threat assessment protocols ground through their cycles. Reese noted the time. 40 seconds. She had expected 30. She was already moving. 6 kilometers behind the column, in a command vehicle equipped with thermal imaging and satellite uplink, Colonel Victor Resnick stood over a tactical display and listened to the radio chatter with the quiet attention of a man who had spent 30 years learning to hear what wasn't being said. The chatter was panicked, confused. That was normal. Soldiers getting shot at always sounded like that in the first 60 seconds. But underneath the panic was something else, a pattern. Resnick was 52 years old, lean and hard, with a face that looked like it had been carved from Siberian granite. He had commanded units in 4 separate conflicts. He had the particular kind of knowledge that comes not from study, but from exposure. The knowledge of what situations feel like in their bones before you can articulate what they are. This situation felt wrong. 1 shot, 1 kill, Forward commander neutralized. That was precision. That was intent. Replay the last 30 seconds of drone footage, he said. The technician beside him pulled up the feed. Thermal imaging from a UAV orbiting the valley at 3,000 meters. The bridge was a dark line across the white field. The column was a cluster of heat signatures at the southern approach. And there, Resnick leaned closer. A single thermal bloom. Upper structure of the bridge, eastern tower. Faint, barely visible against the ambient temperature gradient. There, he said, pointing. Magnify. The image zoomed. The bloom was already fading, but for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, there had been something. One shooter. Assessment, Resnick said. The intelligence officer pulled up a file on his tablet. Single sniper, likely local defense, harassing fire to delay our advance. No, the officer looked up. Sir? Harassing snipers fire at opportunity targets. They shoot what's available. They move often. They accept a low hit percentage as the price of staying alive. Resnick tapped the screen. This was a command kill. First shot of the engagement. Target selection optimized for maximum disruption. He straightened. This is not harassment. This is surgical. He walked to the front of the vehicle and picked up the radio handset. All units, maintain defensive posture. Deploy counter-sniper element. I want thermal scans of the entire bridge structure. He paused. Then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He switched to an old frequency, a channel that hadn't been used in 37 years, a frequency from another war, another life. He keyed the mic. Harlow, he said quietly, I know you're listening. In the farmhouse command post, Colonel Garrett Harlow was standing by the window with a cup of cold coffee in his hand, watching the valley through the frost-streaked glass. When the radio crackled to life on the old frequency, he didn't move. For a long moment, he just stood there, listening to a voice he hadn't heard since 1987. Victor, he said finally, quiet, almost to himself. Gage Sullivan, standing nearby, looked over. Sir? Harlow didn't answer. He set down the coffee and picked up the handset. It's been a long time, he said. The voice on the other end was calm, almost amused. 37 years. I thought you were dead. You weren't supposed to think anything else. Yemen, 2003. That was the story, yes? That was the story. A pause. So why are you here, old friend? Montana is a long way from retirement. Harlow looked out at the bridge, at the shape on the eastern tower that no one else could see, but that he knew was there. I'm not on the bridge, Victor. No, you're not. Another pause, longer this time. But someone you trained is. Harlow said nothing. Resnick's voice came back. Different now. Sharper. The pattern, the target selection. I've seen this before. Berlin, Harlow said. Yes, Berlin. A long silence. You trained someone to fight like you. Better than me. Who? Harlow hesitated then. Her name is Reese Kincaid. She's 27 years old, and she's better than I was at her age. Resnick was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, there was something in his voice that might have been respect or resignation. Then this will not be easy. No, Harlow said. It won't. Old friend, you and I have unfinished business from Berlin. We do. But this, Resnick paused. This is not our war anymore, is it? Harlow looked at the bridge. No, he said quietly. It's theirs. The radio went silent. Brennan, standing at the map table, looked over at Harlow. Colonel, what the hell was that? Harlow set down the handset. That, he said, was the beginning. At 23:54 hours, Reese fired her second shot. She had moved between the first and second shots, 40 meters laterally along the bridge tower. Using the structural steel as cover, her movement timed to a wind gust that masked the sound of her boots on the metal walkway. Her second firing position was lower and farther north, a different angle of approach to the valley floor. The second target was an anti-tank weapons team. Two soldiers carrying a man-portable anti-armor system positioned 50 meters behind the lead vehicle. They were the primary threat to the bridge if the column attempted a direct assault on foot. One of them was setting up the weapon system when the round came through the blizzard at 840 meters per second. The second soldier dropped the weapon and ran. She let him run. She didn't fire at soldiers who were running away from the bridge. This was not sentiment, it was arithmetic. A soldier running away from the bridge was no longer a threat to the bridge. The third shot, at 23:59 hours, struck the primary radio antenna array of the command IFV, a vehicle she had identified by the concentration of antenna mass and the characteristic behavior pattern of the figures clustered around it. The antenna array shattered. The command vehicle's external communications dropped. She heard distantly across the valley the sound of voices raised in urgent confusion. She was already moving to her third firing position. Below the bridge, on the south bank, she could hear the thin sounds of feet on ice, the last of the civilians crossing. Guided by a soldier with a red-filtered flashlight, 12 minutes, Captain Brennan had said. She had bought 4 so far, 8 more to go. The column was reorganizing. She could see them through the scope. Vehicles fanning left and right, trying to find angles, trying to establish where the fire was coming from. Experienced commanders, they would deduce her general position within the next 2 or 3 engagements. And then they would begin suppressing the bridge towers with heavy weapons. She picked her next target, the commander of the lead tank, who had opened his hatch and was scanning the bridge with optics. She read the wind again. The wind had shifted 3 degrees since her last shot. She made the correction without thinking about it. She breathed. She fired. The hatch slammed shut. On the radio, Captain Brennan's voice crackled to life. "Sniper, how's it looking?" Reese pressed the transmit button. "They're learning," she said, "but they're not fast enough." She released the button and disappeared into the steel. The drone came at 00:15 hours. Reese heard it before she saw it. A high-pitched whine cutting through the wind. Quadcopter, small, probably thermal-equipped, flying low through the blizzard, using the snow for cover the same way she did. She was at firing position 5 now, western tower, mid-level platform. She'd moved 3 times since the last shot, each transition calculated, each route memorized during her initial reconnaissance. The drone passed overhead, 30 meters up, searching. She went still. The ghillie suit was good. Thermal suppression built into the fabric, but no suit was perfect. Not at close range. Not if they knew where to look. The drone circled back. She had maybe 10 seconds before it registered her heat signature and transmitted coordinates to whatever counter-sniper team was moving into position on the southern ridge. 10 seconds to decide. Stay still and hope the suppression held, or move and confirm her position. She chose a third option. She rolled left, out from under the platform overhang, into the open. Let her thermal bloom build for exactly 3 seconds against the cold steel. Then she dropped through a maintenance access in the deck and descended 2 levels into the bridge's interior structure. A lattice of crossbeams and support cables that formed a maze only someone who'd spent 41 minutes studying the architecture would know how to navigate in the dark. The drone's thermal camera would have caught her, but it would have caught her where she wasn't anymore. She moved 12 meters north and 3 meters down, a route that used the bridge's own mass to break line of sight from 3 specific approach vectors she'd identified earlier. Through the steel around her, she heard the distant crack of a rifle shot. Not hers. Someone had just fired at the position she'd vacated 6 seconds ago. She smiled in the dark. They'd sent a counter-sniper team. Good. That meant they were taking her seriously. On the south ridge, 940 meters from the bridge, Sergeant Alexei Sokolov lay prone in a hide he'd constructed in 4 minutes flat. The hide was excellent, nearly invisible, built from materials that matched the terrain and suppressed his thermal signature to the point where even a trained observer would need luck to spot him. Alexei was 35 years old, Spetsnaz, 142 confirmed kills across 3 combat zones. He'd been trained by Colonel Resnick personally, trained in the old methods, the patient methods, the methods that turned snipers into ghosts. He had just fired at a target that wasn't there. His spotter, Corporal Yuri Davos, was scanning the bridge structure through a thermal scope. "No movement," Davos said quietly. "She's gone." She was there, the drone confirmed. 3 seconds ago, not now. Alexei adjusted his position, rechecked his zero. The wind was brutal, gusting, unpredictable. He was shooting across a valley in a blizzard at a target who moved like smoke and thought 3 steps ahead. This was not a normal engagement. "Pattern analysis," he said. Davos pulled up a tablet. On it, a map of the bridge with 4 marked positions, the locations where thermal blooms had been detected. First position, Eastern Tower, upper level. Second position, Eastern Tower, mid-level, north side. Third position, deck level, central span. Fourth position, Western Tower, mid-level. Alexei studied the pattern. She's moving north to south, using the structure for cover, transitioning every 2 to 3 shots. Smart. Very smart. Alexei's jaw tightened. Resnick said she was trained by Harlow. The ghost? Yes. Davos was quiet for a moment. Every sniper in the Russian sphere knew the name. Garrett Harlow. The American who'd held a sector in Berlin for 6 hours in 1987 against an entire reconnaissance company. 63 kills, 0 misses. And when the smoke cleared, he'd vanished, like he'd never been there. "If Harlow trained her," Davos said carefully, "then she knows we're here." "Of course she knows. So why did she let us see her thermal signature?" Alexei didn't answer immediately. He was thinking, running through the tactical logic. A sniper who let you see them was either careless or deliberate. And nothing about this woman's performance so far suggested carelessness. "She wanted us to take the shot," he said slowly. "Why?" "To confirm we exist, to learn our reaction time, to see if we'd fire at the first opportunity or wait for certainty." Davos looked at him. "We fired at the first opportunity." "Yes." "Which means she knows we're aggressive." "Which means," Alexei said quietly, "next time she shows herself, it won't be real." He keyed his radio. "Overwatch to command. Target is highly trained. Request second counter-sniper element and extended drone coverage." Resnick's voice came back, calm, almost amused. "Denied. You have everything you need, Sergeant. She's one woman with one rifle. You're Spetsnaz. Adapt." The radio clicked off. Alexei stared at the bridge through his scope. One woman, one rifle, and 37 years of accumulated knowledge from a man who'd made a career out of being unkillable. He settled back into his shooting position. "This is going to be a long night," he said. At 0047 hours, the artillery found the bridge. Not with a direct hit, not yet, but with close enough proximity that the overpressure from each impact rolled through the steel structure in a visible wave. A shudder that started at the foundation pylons and ran the length of the span and came out the far end as a groan so deep it was more felt than heard. Chunks of ice fell from the underside of the bridge deck into the frozen river below. Rivets in the older sections of the truss vibrated in their seats. Reese was at firing position 6, central span, prone on the deck, using the steel railing as cover when the first close impact hit 60 meters east of her position. The shock wave came through the metal and through her chest and through the rifle. She tasted iron. She kept her eye on the scope. The radio crackled. Captain Brennan's voice, different now, sharper. "Sniper, fall back. Bridge is taking fire." She pressed transmit. "How many still crossing?" A pause. Voices in the background. Someone counting. 7, maybe 8. "How long?" 6 minutes, maybe 7. "Then I have 6 minutes. She released the button before he could argue. Another impact, this one northwest of the bridge, close enough that the flash lit the snowfall briefly orange. In the sudden light, she saw the column moving again, vehicles advancing in a staggered pattern, using the visibility disruption from the artillery barrage as cover for their approach. It was a coordinated tactic, and it told her that the general on the other side was thinking ahead. She identified the coordination officer, the vehicle that was managing the timing between the artillery and the advancing column. It had a distinctive antenna configuration on its roof, and it was moving in a pattern that was slightly too regular, slightly too timed to the artillery impacts to be coincidence. She could not take out an armored vehicle with a rifle round, but she could take out the antenna array. Again, she made the shot at 0050 hours from a range of 890 meters through blizzard conditions that had reduced the effective crosswind correction window to fractions of a second. The round struck the primary uplink antenna. The coordination pattern immediately dissolved. Vehicles hesitated. Gaps opened in the advancing line. Two IFVs nearly collided in the dark as their drivers lost the timing signal. Another impact on the bridge deck. This one close enough that a section of railing on the south side buckled outward and fell into the river. She smelled smoke. Something on the bridge's underside was burning. A utility conduit, she thought, ignited by a ricocheting fragment. Something stung her left side. Sharp, brief. She registered it the way you register a paper cut during a firefight. Filed under, deal with later. She was moving to firing position 7 before the echo of the impact died. One part of her mind was tracking the tactical situation with cold, continuous attention. Another part, a smaller part, quieter, working in the background the way the deepest programs run, was doing a different kind of accounting. The bridge was dying. She could hear it, the way you hear an old building in a strong wind. The sounds of a structure discovering the limits of its tolerance. The central span was the problem. The third pylon from the north. The one the engineers had flagged. The one she'd identified during reconnaissance. It had taken a near impact at 0017. She'd seen the flash, felt the shock wave through the deck. That pylon was cracked now. She knew it the way you know a bone is broken before the X-ray confirms it. You feel it wrong. The crack would propagate. In this temperature, with this vibration load, the propagation would accelerate. She estimated the bridge had maybe 15 minutes before the central span failed on its own. She had 4 magazines left, 31 rounds. She started choosing targets with the particular discipline of someone who knows exactly what they have and exactly what they need to do with it. In the farmhouse command post, Colonel Harlow stood by the radio with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He'd been listening to the tactical chatter for the last hour, listening to Reese work, listening to the pattern of shots, the intervals, the target selection. It was all correct. Everything she was doing was textbook ghost protocol. The doctrine he'd developed over 30 years and refined through 4 wars and taught to exactly 3 people in his entire career. 2 of them were dead. One was on that bridge, and she was doing it better than he ever had. Captain Brennan walked over. "Colonel, we need to pull her out." "She won't come." "Then we order her." "She'll ignore it." Brennan's face hardened. "Then what do we do?" Harlow looked at the valley, at the artillery impacts, at the bridge shuddering under punishment it was never designed to withstand. "We trust her," he said finally. "And if the bridge collapses with her still on it, we make damn sure we remember her name." Private Gage Sullivan was standing near the door, listening. He'd been quiet for the last hour, absorbing, learning. Now he spoke up. "Sir, what if we help her?" Brennan looked over. "What?" "Lieutenant Kincaid, what if we give her support? Not extraction, just covering fire or something." "From where, Private? The bridge is 1,000 meters out. We can't reach it with standard rifles." "I have an M110 in my locker, sir, from sniper familiarization training. I'm not good, but I can shoot." Brennan shook his head. You'd be firing blind into a blizzard at targets you can't identify. You'd be more likely to hit friendlies than enemies. Not if someone tells me where to shoot. Gage looked at Harlow. Sir, you know how she thinks. You trained her. You could coordinate with her. Tell me when to fire. Where to fire. I don't need to hit anything. Just make noise. Make them think there's more than one shooter. Harlow studied the young private. 22 years old, 6 months out of basic, barely qualified on the weapons system he was proposing to use. But the logic was sound, and more importantly, the intent was right. Captain, Harlow said quietly, permission to implement Private Sullivan's suggestion. Brennan looked between them, at the map, at the window, at the valley where one woman was holding a bridge against an army because nobody else could. Granted, he said, but Colonel, this is your call. If it goes wrong, it won't. How do you know? Harlow smiled. It was a thin smile, the kind that carried weight. Because 37 years ago, I fought a battle just like this one, and I learned something important. What's that? One person fighting alone can be a ghost, but 2 people fighting together can be a nightmare. He picked up the radio. Kincaid, this is Harlow. Do you copy? 3 seconds of silence, then Reese's voice, calm, steady. Copy, Colonel. I'm a little busy. I know, listen, I'm putting Private Sullivan on overwatch from the North Bank. He's going to provide suppressive fire on your mark. He won't hit anything, but he'll make enough noise to convince them you're not alone. A pause. That's breaking protocol, sir. Ghost protocol says solo operations only. I know what the protocol says. I wrote it. Harlow's voice was quiet. But I also learned something I didn't put in the manual. What's that? Ghosts work alone, but soldiers work together. And right now, you're not a ghost. You're a soldier. So let's act like it. Another pause. Longer this time. Understood, sir. Tell Sullivan to stand by. I'll call the shot. Harlow looked at Gage. You heard her. Get your rifle. Get to the North Bank. And when she calls it, you fire everything you've got at the coordinates she gives you. Don't aim. Don't think. Just shoot. Gage nodded, grabbed his gear, started for the door. Sergeant Mercer caught his arm. Kid, you know what you're doing? Gage looked at him. No, Sergeant, but neither did she when she crossed that bridge, so I figure we're even. He went out into the snow. Mercer watched him go, then looked at Harlow. He's going to get himself killed. Maybe, Harlow said, but he's going to do it for the right reasons. That counts for something. At 0112 hours, the first tank reached the southern approach ramp. It was a main battle tank. Reese identified the silhouette through the scope. M1 Abrams, American-made, probably captured from the northern offensive. It was moving at approximately 12 kilometers per hour. Cautious. The kind of speed that said the crew inside was uncertain but following orders. Behind it, at 50-meter intervals, came 2 more tanks, and then a line of IFVs carrying infantry. She could not stop a tank with a rifle. This was a fact, not a limitation. What she could do was shape the tank's behavior. A tank without a clear sighting picture for its commander was a tank operating on inertia rather than decision. A tank whose accompanying infantry had been scattered was a tank in the worst possible operational condition. Powerful, but effectively blind, because tanks needed infantry to guard against the threats they couldn't see. She began with the infantry. The soldiers following the lead tank were moving in a tactical spread. They were good. They used the tank as cover. They maintained proper intervals. They were scanning, but they were scanning for a sniper on the bridge, which meant they were scanning up, toward the towers, toward the elevated positions. She was on the deck now, lower than they expected. The first shot, at 0115 hours, struck a squad leader. She identified him by the way the men near him were orienting to his direction. The squad fractured. Half went to ground. The other half moved laterally without coordination. The tank, hearing the shot but not seeing the source, slowed. Its turret swung left, then right, searching. She was already moving. The second shot, at 0117 hours, struck the machine gunner on the second tank's turret ring. The gunner dropped inside the vehicle. The hatch stayed open. The tank commander, trying to maintain situational awareness, had left it up. She did not take a shot at the commander through the hatch. Not yet. She needed the commander to make a specific decision. The decision came at 0118 hours. The lead tank, uncertain, slowing, with its infantry scattered and no clear target to engage, did what vehicles do when their drivers are uncertain. It drifted slightly right, toward the solid south railing of the bridge, seeking the psychological reassurance of a known boundary. It was a small drift, probably unconscious, the driver's hands following his nervous system. But the south railing was already weakened. The tank's right track caught a railing bracket, a piece of structural steel that had been shaken loose by the earlier artillery impact. The track locked momentarily. The tank slewed right with its own momentum. The front glasses struck the railing post at an oblique angle, and the railing post, which had been cracked at its base by overpressure, gave. The tank didn't fall. It was too heavy, too wide, but it stopped completely, 45 degrees off axis, blocking the full width of the bridge approach. Its right track suspended over the edge, its left track unable to get purchase on the ice-covered deck. The second tank braked. The third tank braked. The column behind them compressed. The bridge was blocked. Reese pressed the transmit button. "Sullivan, you ready?" From the north bank, Gage Sullivan's voice came back, young, nervous, but steady. "Ready, ma'am. I'm going to call coordinates. You're going to fire 20 rounds at those coordinates as fast as you can reload. You will not hit anything. You will not try to hit anything. You're just making noise. Understood?" "Understood. 3, 2, 1, mark." She rattled off a grid coordinate, a position on the southern ridge, approximately where she estimated Alexei's counter-sniper team was set up. Gage opened fire, 20 rounds in 18 seconds, M110 semi-automatic. The sound carried across the valley, sharp, distinct, a different signature than her bolt action. It sounded like there were two shooters. On the southern ridge, Alexei jerked back from his scope as rounds impacted the terrain around his position. None of them close, most of them high, wild, but enough to make him move. "Second shooter," Davos hissed. "North bank." "I see it." Alexei was already transitioning, rolling left, away from his primary position, toward a fallback hide he'd prepared. But in that moment, in the 3 seconds it took him to move, he lost his sight picture on the bridge. Reese used those 3 seconds. She fired twice. Once at the lead tank's vision block. The block shattered. The driver was blind. Once at the suspension of the second tank, a precision shot into the road wheel assembly. The kind of shot that took practice and patience and perfect understanding of armored vehicle mechanics. The wheel locked. The second tank lurched. Stopped. Now 2 tanks were disabled, blocking the approach, and the column couldn't advance. She keyed the radio. "Sullivan, cease fire, good job." "Did I hit anything?" "No, but you made them move. That's all I needed." She heard him exhale. Relief and adrenaline, and the particular pride that comes from doing something useful in a situation where you thought you'd be useless. "Standing by for next call, ma'am." She didn't answer. She was watching the valley, watching the column reorganize, watching the engineering vehicle pushing forward through the stalled traffic. They'd clear the blockage eventually, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30, but she didn't have 20 minutes. The radio crackled, Captain Brennan's voice. "Sniper, last group is crossing now. 4 minutes, maybe 5. Reese looked south, at the column, at the engineering vehicle, at the artillery still walking rounds across the terrain. Then she looked at the bridge beneath her, at the cracked pylon, at the failing structure, at the span that was, even now, groaning under stress it had never been designed for. 4 minutes. She reloaded her rifle, checked her ammunition. 11 rounds left. "Copy," she said into the radio. I'll hold. In the command vehicle 6 kilometers south, Colonel Victor Resnick stood over the tactical display and made a decision he knew he would regret. All units, he said, cease artillery fire on bridge structure. His aide looked at him. Sir, you heard me. Cease fire. Maintain counter battery on the northern ridge, but no more impacts on or near the bridge. Sir, if we stop the bombardment, she'll have clear fields of fire again. I know. Then why? Resnick looked at the map. At the bridge. At the icon representing one sniper who had, in the span of 90 minutes, killed 7 of his men and disabled 3 vehicles, and turned a straightforward river crossing into a tactical nightmare. Because if I keep shelling the bridge, he said quietly, I'll bring it down before she does, and then I lose the crossing permanently. He needed the bridge intact. He needed her dead. And at this moment, those 2 objectives were mutually exclusive. Bring the engineering vehicle forward, he said. Clear the approach. Prepare assault teams for dismounted crossing. And get Alexei on the radio. Tell him he has 10 minutes to kill that sniper, or I'll do it myself. The aide hesitated. Sir, with respect, you haven't operated in the field in 15 years. I know. Resnick picked up his rifle, a Dragunov SVD that he'd carried since 1989. But some things you don't forget. He looked at the bridge one more time. Harlow, he said quietly, not to anyone in particular, just to the wind. Your student is good, better than good, but she's fighting alone, and nobody fights alone forever. He stepped out into the snow. At 01:24 hours, the last civilian crossed the bridge. Her name was Eleanor Graves, 74 years old. She was carrying her granddaughter, a 4-year-old girl named Lily, who was crying because she'd lost her stuffed bear somewhere in the chaos. Eleanor slipped on the ice. A soldier, a young corporal named Davies, ran out from the north bank and caught her before she fell. He picked up Lily, carried both of them across the final 100 meters to safety. Reese watched through the scope, watched Eleanor reach the north side, watched the soldier set Lily down, watched the little girl look back at the bridge with wide, frightened eyes. The radio crackled. Sniper, we're clear. All civilians are across. Blow the bridge, now. Reese pressed the transmit button. Wait. What? Why? Because I'm still on it. A pause, then Brennan's voice, harder now. Then get off it. That's an order, Lieutenant. With respect, sir, you don't have authority to order me off this bridge. The hell I don't. I'm not MARSOC. I'm not active combat personnel. I'm a logistics officer who volunteered for a mission you couldn't fill, which means I'm operating under my own discretion. She paused. And I'm not done yet. Kincaid, the column is going to push across. Engineering vehicle will clear the tanks in 15 minutes. When they do, they'll send dismounted infantry. Fast, organized, and if I'm not here to slow them down, they'll be across before the demolition charges blow. Then we detonate now, with you on it. No, sir, because if you do that, the south span will fall first. The charges are on the north end, and the blast wave will propagate south to north, which means the south span drops before the north span, and that gives them a platform to work from. They'll have engineers across within an hour. Silence on the radio. Reese continued. But if you wait, if you let me control when the bridge falls, I can time it so the north and south spans drop simultaneously. And then there's no platform, no salvage, just a river and 2 broken pylons. You're asking me to let you die on that bridge? No, sir. I'm telling you I'm going to finish this job. And then I'm asking you to trust me enough to blow it at the right time. Captain Brennan didn't answer, but Colonel Harlow's voice came through instead. Reese, he said, quiet, steady, the voice of a man who understood exactly what she was doing and why. Yes, sir. You've got 6 rounds left. You know what needs to happen. Yes, sir. Then do it. And when you're done, you call it. Not them, you. Understood. Harlow paused. Then, Enrice, sir, I'm proud of you. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. She just released the transmit button and put her eye back to the scope. 11 rounds had become 6. 6 rounds to buy enough time to get off the bridge before it fell. 6 rounds to finish what she'd started. She settled into her final firing position, central span, right above the cracked pylon, and she waited for the column to come. The engineering vehicle moved like a beetle through snow, slow, methodical, pushing the disabled tank aside with a hydraulic arm that groaned under the weight. Metal scraped against metal. The sound carried across the valley like a scream. Reese watched through the scope. Calculated. The engineering vehicle would clear the blockage in 12 minutes. Maybe 10 if the crew was good. Behind it, she could see infantry forming up. 2 platoons, maybe 60 soldiers. They'd learned from the earlier chaos. These men were moving with discipline, staying low, using terrain, advancing in bounds. Professional. 6 rounds left, 60 soldiers. The arithmetic was clear. She couldn't stop them. Not with 6 bullets. But she could shape how they moved, where they moved, and most importantly, when. She shifted her position, 2 meters south, closer to the cracked pylon. Close enough that she could hear it now. A deep, structural groan that pulsed with each gust of wind. The crack had grown, propagated up through the concrete like a black vein. The bridge was dying. She estimated 8 minutes before the pylon failed completely, which meant she had 8 minutes to work with. She selected her first target. Not a soldier, not the engineering vehicle. The ground. Specifically the ice on the frozen river. 40 meters south of the bridge approach, right where dismounted infantry would cross if the column commander decided to bypass the bridge entirely and send troops across the frozen surface. She fired at 01:28 hours. The round struck the ice and punched through. A dark hole appeared. Water welled up, black against white. She fired again, same area, 10 meters east of the first impact. Another hole. The message was clear. The ice is compromised. This route is watched. I have ammunition remaining, and I know where you're going to cross. She saw the effect immediately. The infantry platoon that had been forming up on the riverbank hesitated. Officers turned to each other. Radios came out. Doubt was a weapon, and she just armed it. Round 3, she put it into the vision block of the engineering vehicle. Not to destroy the vehicle, just to blind the operator for 30 seconds while he figured out what had happened and whether he was under direct fire or if it was a ricochet. 30 seconds of stop movement, 30 seconds closer to the pylon's failure point. 3 rounds left. She heard movement below her, boots on steel. Voices. Soldiers on the bridge approach. They'd sent a scout element ahead, 4 men, moving carefully, checking the structure, looking for traps, for charges, for her. They wouldn't find the charges. The charges were on the north end, placed by Sergeant Mercer's demolition team, wired to a firing circuit that was waiting for one word from Captain Brennan. But they might find her. She went completely still, controlled her breathing down to 6 breaths per minute. Shallow, silent. The ghillie suit blended with the steel and snow. She was a shape among shapes, texture among texture. The scouts passed beneath her position, 20 feet below, moving on to the central span. One of them stopped, looked up, almost directly at her. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The soldier's radio crackled, a voice in Russian, ordering them back. The bridge was unstable. Return to the approach and wait for the engineering vehicle to clear the path. The scouts withdrew. She exhaled slowly. 2 minutes had passed. 6 minutes until structural failure. The radio in her chest rig came alive. Not Brennan's voice this time. Not Harlow's. A different voice. Older. Accented. Calm. Kincaid, this is Colonel Victor Resnick. I believe you know who I am. She pressed the transmit button. I know. Then you know I have no personal malice toward you. This is simply war. You understand. I understand. A pause. Wind static on the line. I have thought about that night in Berlin for most of my adult life. Tonight I finally understand why Harlow beat me. Why are you telling me this? Because you have the same focus he had. You are not fighting to destroy my column. You are fighting to save 147 people you will never meet. That clarity is what makes you dangerous. Resnick's voice was quiet, almost reflective. I am offering you a choice. Leave the bridge now, walk away. I give you my word I will not fire on you. You have earned that much respect. Reese looked down at the cracked pylon, at the bridge groaning beneath her. And if I leave, what happens? My engineers clear the approach. My column crosses. We take the valley. The war continues. And the defensive line to the north collapses. Yes, which means more people die, soldiers, civilians, people who didn't volunteer for this. Resnick was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally, that is the nature of war. Reese checked her rifle, 3 rounds chambered. Then my answer is no. I thought as much. Resnick's voice carried something that might have been sadness or resignation. Then I will see you on the bridge, Lieutenant, and one of us will not leave it. The radio went silent. Reese settled back into her firing position. 3 rounds, 5 minutes. She heard the engineering vehicle moving again, pushing, scraping, metal on metal, and then she heard something else. Footsteps. Coming from the north side of the bridge. Running. She turned. Private Gage Sullivan was sprinting across the bridge deck. M110 rifle in his hands. No cover, no concealment. Just a 22-year-old kid with 6 months of training running toward a firing position because he'd decided that was where he needed to be. Sullivan, she hissed into the radio. Get back. No, ma'am. That's an order. With respect, ma'am, you said you're not MARSOC, which means you can't give me orders either. His voice was shaking. Adrenaline and fear and determination fighting for control. Besides, the colonel said ghosts work alone, but soldiers work together. So I'm being a soldier. He reached her position, dropped into cover behind a steel beam. His face was pale. His hands were steady. What's the play? He asked. Reese stared at him. At this kid who should have stayed in the farmhouse, who should have let the professionals handle it, who just run across 1,000 meters of open ground under potential enemy observation because he decided one rifle wasn't enough. You're an idiot, she said. Yes, ma'am. You could die here. So could you. She almost smiled, almost. Okay, here's what we do. I'm going to fire my last 3 rounds. When I do, the counter-sniper team on the South Ridge is going to light up this position. They've been tracking me all night. They know roughly where I am. When I shoot, they'll shoot back. And you're going to wait exactly 5 seconds after my 3rd shot. Then you're going to fire 10 rounds. Not at targets, at nothing. Just noise. Make them think there are 2 of us. Make them divide their attention. And then we run. North, fast. Because this bridge is going to fall in about 4 minutes, and I'd prefer not to be on it when it does. Gage nodded. Understood. Sullivan, ma'am? Thank you. He looked at her, really looked. The way you look at someone when you realize you're sharing a moment that will define the rest of your life. If there is a rest of your life. You saved 147 people tonight, he said. Seemed wrong to let you do it alone. The engineering vehicle cleared the last obstacle at 0131 hours. The approach was open. Reese put her eye to the scope. Round 4. She fired at the lead element of the advancing infantry. Not to kill, to suppress. The round impacted the ground 3 feet in front of a squad leader. He dropped. His squad scattered. 5 seconds of chaos. Round 5. She shifted aim, put it into the tread assembly of the first tank that was attempting to move forward now that the path was clear. The tread didn't break, but the impact was enough to make the driver hesitate. Reverse. Check for damage. 10 seconds of delay. Round 6, her last round. She didn't fire at the column. She fired at the cracked pylon beneath her feet, right into the heart of the fracture. The round punched through weakened concrete into the crack, deepening it, widening it. The pylons shuddered and began to fail. She felt it through the deck, a vibration that started deep and rose to the surface like a wave. "Sullivan, move!" They ran, north across the central span, boots hammering on steel, the bridge groaning beneath them. Behind them, she heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle. Alexi's counter-sniper team firing at the position she just vacated. The rounds pinged off steel. Close. Too close. Sullivan stopped, turned, raised his M110. 5 seconds, she shouted. He counted, aloud, like he was afraid he'd lose track. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He fired. 10 rounds, semi-automatic, as fast as he could squeeze the trigger. The counter-sniper team shifted fire towards Sullivan's muzzle flash. It bought them 3 seconds. 3 seconds to cross another 20 meters. The radio erupted, multiple voices, shouting, "Captain Brennan, Kincaid, Sullivan, status." Sergeant Mercer, "I have eyes on them. They're moving north. 30 seconds to clear the blast radius." Colonel Harlow, quiet, steady. "Reese, when you're clear, you call it. Nobody else." The bridge shuddered again, harder this time. The pylon was going. She could see the north end now, could see the demolition charges placed on the foundation, could see Sergeant Mercer on the riverbank with his hand on the detonator, waiting. 20 meters to go. 15. Behind her, the engineering vehicle was on the bridge, moving forward. The column commander had made his decision. Cross now, fast, before the bridge fell on its own. 10 meters. The pylon cracked, audibly. A sound like a gunshot amplified 100 times. The deck tilted. 2 degrees. 3 degrees. She grabbed Sullivan's arm, pulled him forward. 5 meters. The radio. Harlow's voice. "Reese, now." She hit the transmit button while running. One word. Blow it. Sergeant Mercer initiated the firing circuit at 0132 hours and 8 seconds. The demolition charges were shape charges, military grade, placed on the north end's primary pylons by a team that knew exactly what they were doing. 4 charges, oriented to sever the foundation connections and drop the north span into the river. Under normal conditions, this would have been sufficient, but the bridge was not in normal conditions. The third pylon from the north had been failing for the last 14 minutes. The crack had propagated exactly as Reese had calculated, running up through the concrete core in a branching pattern that the cold had accelerated. The round she'd fired into the crack had been the final stress. The pylon was at 90% failure when the demolition charges detonated. The shock wave from the charges reached the cracked pylon at the same instant that Reese and Sullivan reached the North Riverbank. The pylon gave. Not cleanly, not all at once. First, the concrete shell fractured. Then the internal rebar bent. Then the weight of the central span found nothing to rest on and began to fall. The north pylons, severed by the charges, dropped simultaneously. The north span fell into the river with a sound like thunder compressed into 2 seconds. 28 tons of steel hitting ice. The ice shattered. Black water erupted upward in a plume that rose 30 meters and froze in the air before falling back down as sleet. The shock wave ran south through the remaining structure. It reached the central span, the broken pylon, the already compromised deck plates, and it found exactly what Reese had calculated it would find. The central span failed, not at the edges, at the center, right above the third pylon. The deck buckled, first upward like a suspension cable snapping, then downward like a drawbridge cut free. The engineering vehicle, halfway across the central span, tilted. The driver gunned the engine, tried to reverse, but the angle was too steep. The traction was gone. The vehicle slid backward, into the gap, into the river. 45 tons of steel and machinery vanishing into black water. The central span followed, breaking into 3 large sections and a cascade of smaller pieces. Steel trusses folding like wet cardboard, concrete pylons crumbling into gravel. The sound was enormous, biblical, the kind of sound that doesn't have a single source but comes from everywhere at once. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. The river was black. Broken ice floated on the surface like shattered glass. Steam rose where hot metal met cold water. The north and south pylons remained standing, 2 broken teeth on opposite banks. Between them was nothing, just a gap, and a memory of what had been. On the north bank, Reese collapsed to her knees. She was shaking, not from cold, from adrenaline finally catching up to everything her body had been ignoring for the last 94 minutes. Her hands were numb. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. Her hearing was muffled from the explosions. She could taste blood. Had bitten her tongue at some point without noticing. Sullivan was sitting beside her, staring at the river, at the gap. His face was white. "Holy God," he whispered. Reese didn't answer. She was looking at the south bank, at the column that had stopped at the edge of the destroyed approach, at the lights of vehicles that would now have to find another crossing. Somewhere else, sometime later. Too late to matter. Boots crunched in snow behind her. She turned. Colonel Garrett Harlow was standing there, 68 years old, weathered and gray. He'd walked down from the farmhouse, 1,000 meters through snow and dark because riding would have been too fast, and he'd needed the time to process what he'd just witnessed. He looked at Reese, at the rifle in her lap, at the bridge that wasn't there anymore. "How many rounds?" he asked quietly. 43. "How many did you miss?" 0. Harlow nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, but needed to hear it confirmed. "You did good, kid." Reese looked at the river, at the destroyed bridge, at the column stopped on the far side. "I did what needed doing." "That's the same thing." "Is it?" Harlow knelt down beside her, slowly. His knees didn't bend like they used to. He put a hand on her shoulder. 37 years ago, I held a position in Berlin for 6 hours, 63 kills. Everyone called it a miracle, called me a ghost. For 37 years, that was the standard, the thing people measured themselves against. He paused. "Tonight you did something harder. You held this bridge for 94 minutes against impossible odds with impossible limitations. And you did it not for glory, not for recognition, but because 147 people needed someone to stand between them and death." His voice was quiet, heavy with something that might have been pride or grief or both. "I was good, Reese, but you're better. Not because you shot straighter, but because you understood something I didn't learn until I was too old to use it." "What's that?" "That being a ghost means you fight alone, but being a soldier means you accept help when it's offered. And you," he looked at Sullivan, "you both did that tonight, and that's why you're still alive." Captain Brennan walked up, Sergeant Mercer beside him. Both men had expressions that looked like they were trying to reconcile what they'd seen with what they'd thought was possible. "Lieutenant Kincaid," Brennan said. His voice was formal, official. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately." Reese looked up at him. "Sir? You're going to the hospital. That's not a request. You've been bleeding from your left side for the last 40 minutes, and you're about 3 minutes from shock. So you're going to get in that truck," he pointed at a Humvee idling nearby, "and you're going to let the medics do their job." Reese looked down. There was blood on her jacket, more than she'd realized. The fragment from the artillery impact. It had hit her at some point during the engagement. She'd felt it, registered it, filed it under problems to deal with later. Later was now. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not, and that's also not up for debate." Brennan's expression softened slightly. You did your job, Kincaid. You did it better than anyone had a right to expect. Now let us do ours. Harlow helped her to her feet, steadied her when she swayed. He's right, Harlow said quietly. You're done for tonight. The column will take 11 hours to find another crossing. By then, reinforcements will be here. The valley is secure because of you. They walked her to the Humvee. A medic was waiting. Young woman, competent hands. She started assessing the wound immediately. Shrapnel, the medic said. Embedded, not deep. You got lucky. Reese almost laughed. Lucky. Gage Sullivan approached, still holding his rifle, still looking shell-shocked. Ma'am, he said, I just wanted to say, you did good, Sullivan. I didn't hit anything. You weren't supposed to. You made noise. You made them think. You gave me the seconds I needed. She looked at him. That's what soldiers do. They give each other seconds. And sometimes seconds are the difference between everyone living and everyone dying. Sullivan nodded, slowly, like he was filing that away in the part of his brain reserved for lessons that only come once. The radio crackled one last time, a different frequency, the old one, the channel from 1987. Victor Resnick's voice. Harlow, your student is alive. I see the thermal signature. Harlow picked up the handset. She is. I am glad. A pause. I do not say that often, but tonight I mean it. Why? Because what she did was not tactics. It was art. And art should be preserved, not destroyed. Resnick's voice was quiet, reflective. Tell her I will remember this night. Tell her that the next time we meet, if we meet, it will be different. There will be no honor, no respect, only war. There won't be a next time, Victor. You are certain? Yes. How? Harlow looked at Reese, at Sullivan, at the soldiers gathering on the riverbank to see the bridge that wasn't there. Because this isn't our war anymore, he said. It's theirs, and they fight differently than we did. Resnick was silent for a long time. Perhaps that is for the best, he said finally. Goodbye, old friend. Goodbye. The radio went silent. Harlow set down the handset and looked at the valley, at the broken bridge, at the column retreating into the distance. 37 years of history, 37 years of wondering if he'd trained someone well enough to carry on what he'd started. He had his answer now. 2 days later, the hospital room was quiet, sterile, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too loud. Reese was sitting up in bed when the knock came. Come in, she said. The door opened. Eleanor Graves stood there, 74 years old, silver hair, kind eyes. She was holding the hand of a little girl with blonde curls and a stuffed bear that looked new. Lily. I hope we're not intruding, Eleanor said quietly. No, please. Eleanor and Lily walked in. The girl hid behind her grandmother's legs, peeking out with wide eyes. Lily wanted to meet you, Eleanor said. She's been asking about the soldier on the bridge, the one who made sure she got across. Reese looked at the little girl, at the stuffed bear, at the eyes that were too young to understand what had almost happened. Hi, Lily, Reese said softly. Lily didn't answer, but she stepped out from behind her grandmother, held out the bear. Grandma bought me a new one, she said, because I lost my old one on the bridge. But this one's braver. Grandma said it's like you. Reese's throat tightened. Thank you, she managed. Eleanor put a hand on Lily's shoulder. We won't stay long, but I needed to say something. She paused. 147 people crossed that bridge. You'll never meet most of them. They'll never know your name, but I will. And I'll make sure Lily knows it too. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper. Every person who made it across signed this. It's not official. It's not fancy, but it's real. She handed it to Reese. Reese unfolded it. It was a simple sheet, handwritten, 147 signatures, adults and children, neat and messy, English and Spanish and what looked like Korean. At the top, in careful letters, "To the soldier on the bridge, thank you for our lives." Reese stared at the names of people she'd never met, would never meet, but who were alive because she decided that 94 minutes on a dying bridge mattered more than walking away. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Eleanor smiled. "You already did everything that mattered." They left quietly. Reese sat alone with the paper, read every name, slowly, like a prayer. And for the first time since the bridge fell, she let herself cry. Not from pain, from something else. Something that felt like purpose. 6 weeks later, Quantico, Virginia. The rain was cold, November rain, the kind that didn't freeze but felt like it should. Reese stood outside the MARSOC administrative building with a folder in her hand. Inside the folder were reinstatement papers, signed by Major Dax Harding himself, an official apology, an invitation to return to the sniper program with full honors, and a waiver for the physical standards she'd failed before. Everything she'd wanted 6 weeks ago. She looked at the folder, at the rain soaking through the paper, at her name typed in official military font. Then she walked inside. Major Harding was in his office. He stood when she entered, extended his hand. "Lieutenant Kincaid, thank you for coming." She shook his hand. "Sir, I'll get right to it. We made a mistake. I made a mistake. You're the best shooter we've seen in a decade, and we let bureaucratic standards get in the way of operational reality." He gestured to a chair. "I'd like to offer you immediate reinstatement. No questions, no retesting. You're in." Reese sat down. "I appreciate that, sir. But I'm declining." Harding's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Why?" "Because 6 weeks ago this was my dream. But dreams change when you realize there are things more important than what you want." "And what's more important than MARSOC?" "Teaching." She set the folder on his desk. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to request assignment to the sniper school. As an instructor." Harding sat back. "You want to teach?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because I learned something on that bridge. I learned that the best soldiers aren't the ones who are strongest or fastest. They're the ones who understand why they're fighting. And I want to teach people that. Not just how to shoot, but why it matters." Harding was quiet for a long moment. He picked up the folder, looked at it, set it back down. "You know instructors don't get the glory, right? No combat deployments, no headlines, just a lot of early mornings and stubborn students." "I know. And you're okay with that?" Reese thought about Gage Sullivan, about a 22-year-old kid who'd run across a bridge because he'd decided that was where he needed to be. About the seconds he'd bought her, the seconds that had meant everything. "Yes, sir, I'm okay with that." Harding nodded slowly. "Request granted. You start Monday." 1 year later, the shooting range was cold, December cold, the kind that made your fingers ache inside gloves. 16 students stood at the firing line, 8 men, 8 women, ages ranging from 23 to 29. All of them volunteers, all of them hoping to make it through a program that had a 90% failure rate. Reese walked down the line, checking positions, correcting grips, watching the small things that separated good shooters from great ones. She stopped behind a young woman, 24, small frame, nervous hands. "Relax your shoulders," Reese said quietly. The woman adjusted. "Yes, ma'am." "You're tensing up. Why?" "I'm afraid I'll miss." "You will miss. Everyone misses. That's not failure, that's data. You learn from it and you adjust." The woman nodded, but her hands were still shaking. Reese knelt beside her. "What's your name?" "Private Hernandez, ma'am." "Why are you here, Hernandez?" "To be a sniper, ma'am." "No, I mean, why are you here? What brought you to this range?" Hernandez was quiet for a moment. "My brother," she said finally. "He was killed in action 2 years ago, Afghanistan. He was a sniper. He used to tell me stories about the people he protected, the convoys he watched over, the soldiers who came home because he was on overwatch. Her voice was soft, but steady. I want to do that. I want to be the reason someone makes it home. Reese reached into her pocket, pulled out a single round, .338 Lapua Magnum. She'd been carrying it for a year, ever since that night on the bridge. Do you know what this is? Reese asked. A round, ma'am. Not just any round. This is the one I didn't fire. I had 43 rounds that night. I fired 42. This one stayed in the chamber, unfired. She held it out. I want you to keep this, not as good luck, but as a reminder. Of what, ma'am? That every round you carry represents a choice, a decision about when to act and when to wait. And the best snipers aren't the ones who fire the most rounds. They're the ones who know which rounds not to fire. Hernandez took the round, looked at it, closed her hand around it. Thank you, ma'am. Reese stood, stepped back. Range is hot. Engage your targets. 16 rifles fired. Not all of them hit, but they were learning. At the back of the range, Colonel Garrett Harlow stood watching. He'd come down from the administrative building just to see Reese work, to watch her teach the way he'd taught her. Beside him, Sergeant Mercer crossed his arms. She's good at this, Mercer said. She's better than good. You proud of her? Harlow smiled, the kind of smile that carried weight. Every day. Think she'll ever go operational again? Marsoc would take her in a heartbeat now. No, she's done fighting. You sure? Harlow watched Reese move down the line, watched her correct a stance, adjust a grip, offer quiet encouragement to a student who was struggling. I'm sure, because she's not fighting anymore. She's building the next generation, and that's a harder job than pulling a trigger. Mercer nodded. They stood in silence for a moment, watching 16 students learn how to become what Reese already was. You ever regret it? Mercer asked. Teaching her everything you knew? No, why would I? Because she's better than you now, and that must sting. Harlow laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from deep in the chest. Sting? That's the whole point. You don't train someone to be as good as you. You train them to be better. Because if they're not better, then what was the point of teaching them? He turned to leave. Come on, I'll buy you coffee. Sir, the base coffee is free. Then I'll buy you the good stuff. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Harlow looked back at the range, at Reese, at the students who would carry forward what she was teaching them. Legacy, he said quietly. We're celebrating legacy somewhere in Russia. In an office that didn't officially exist, Colonel Viktor Resnick sat at a desk reviewing reconnaissance photos. The photos showed a bridge, or rather, what remained of one. 2 pylons on opposite riverbanks, the gap between them spanned by temporary pontoons now. Functional, but slow. His engineers had estimated 6 weeks to rebuild the permanent structure. It had been 54 weeks, and the bridge still wasn't finished. Every time they started construction, something went wrong. Materials delayed, weather interference, equipment failures. It was almost like the bridge didn't want to be rebuilt. Resnick set down the photos and picked up 2 others. The first was old, faded, taken in 1987. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside a younger version of Garrett Harlow. Both in uniform, both holding rifles. Taken during a brief ceasefire when they'd met under a white flag to exchange wounded. They'd been enemies, but they'd been professionals, and professionals respected each other. The second photo was new, taken by satellite 6 weeks ago. It showed a woman on a shooting range, instructing students. The resolution was good enough to see her face, Reese Kincaid. Resnick placed the 2 photos side by side on his desk. 2 generations, 2 wars, 2 ways of fighting. He'd spent 37 years trying to settle a score with Harlow, trying to prove he was the better operator, the better strategist, the better soldier. And then a 27-year-old woman had shown him that the question was irrelevant. Because the best soldier wasn't the one who won the most fights. It was the one who knew what they were fighting for. He opened a drawer, pulled out a bottle of vodka, poured 2 glasses, set one in front of Harlow's photo, one in front of Reese's, raised his own glass. "To worthy opponents," he said quietly, "may they always know when to stop fighting and start teaching." He drank, set down the glass, and filed the photos away in a folder marked "Closed." The snow fell on Quantico, on the range, on the students learning to shoot, on Reese teaching them how. It fell on Montana, on the valley, on the broken pylons that stood like monuments to a night when one person decided that 147 lives mattered more than impossible odds. It fell on the world, quiet, patient, covering old wounds with new white. And somewhere in all that snow, in all that silence, a voice carried through the wind. Garrett Harlow's voice, though he wasn't speaking aloud, just thinking, remembering. A ghost doesn't vanish, it passes the torch, and the light keeps burning, long after the ghost is gone.